Joining us now from Capitol Hill, Democratic Congressman from Texas and a member of the House Budget Committee and Ways and Means as well, Representative Lloyd Doggett. Thank you very much for being on the show today. This is quite a story. First of all, let's just lay it out for folks who might not have seen the 60 Minutes piece, which was amazing. Corporations found major loopholes by parking their headquarters, basically, the headquarters profits overseas. What do these companies actually look like, though, over there?
Well, that's right, Mika. Some of our most prominent corporate citizens are not paying their fair share of our national security and other vital public services, and some, like Transocean, went so far as to renounce their American citizenship and nominally move abroad, even though they maintain their management and control right here in Texas. In the case of they're not doing the same amount of contribution to our security as small businesses all over America. They have many gimmicks to do that.
It's a gimmick? Is that how you would characterize it?
I'd characterize renouncing one's American citizenship as much more than a gimmick. I think it's a wrong. But there are many loopholes and provisions that allow some of these multinationals to not contribute as much as the janitor who cleans up their offices or the small business on Main Street across America.
Obviously, our tax rates are a lot higher. To name a few of these companies beyond Transocean, we got Pfizer, Merck, GE, part owner of NBC Universal, all moving abroad to avoid paying 35%, that corporate tax rate here in the U.S. It is somewhat of an exodus, whether you call it a gimmick or not. What do we need to do to keep our companies here?
Well, I think it's not so much a matter of all of the moving abroad as using subsidiaries and other tactics to avoid paying their fair share. I think we ought to look at why that money is going abroad and why we have in our tax code incentives for them to invest abroad instead of investing in America. After all, if a company is paying 35% on opening a new plant here in the United States and nothing initially on opening one abroad, they have an incentive to ship jobs overseas. I think we need to look at our tax code and reform it. I don't think that a corporation here ought to be able to borrow money, deduct the interest in the United States, but never recognize the income initially of what it's spending overseas, or that a bank should not be taxed on the interest that it earns from investing overseas. It's one thing after another where our tax code is encouraging the export of both jobs and revenues.
Congressman, it's Willie Geist. You said it right there.
Willie.
Good to see you this morning. We can sit here and bash the companies who are taking advantage of this, but they've got an obligation to shareholders. They have to fight for their business. So isn't the answer to not force them overseas, where a tax rate in Switzerland is 15%? Why wouldn't they go over there when they can make up 20% worth of tax revenue? Shouldn't we bring down that corporate tax rate?
Well, as long as our members of Congress yield to the powerful lobbying influences here and allow them to circumvent the tax laws that apply to individuals and small businesses here, yes, I would assume they would use the loopholes they helped write. I'm willing to look at the overall corporate tax rate, but I think we begin by looking at where are those loopholes and how can they be fixed. And then, of course, I'm bothered, you've been talking about the budget all morning, as to why it is we ought to go borrow more money from the Chinese or the Saudis in order to allow a few of these corporations to pay less money, because that's basically what they're advocating. They're advocating reform that is not balanced. I would pursue the Reagan approach. When President Reagan signed the 1986 tax reform, he actually raised more revenue from corporations in order to reduce taxes for individuals. But these corporations think they have almost a birthright to not pay a fair share of the cost of our country.
Let's go further with that. Should these companies be forced to pay up? Have they done something? Would you characterize it as morally wrong? Is there something illegal about it? How would you characterize the role of these companies in terms of what they've done to avoid basically paying this 35% corporate tax rate in this country?
Well, some, like General Electric, probably benefit more from our American system of security and justice than corporations anywhere in the world. I think they do have a duty to contribute their fair share to the operation of our government. And yes, I think there are many provisions that General Electric, for example, lobbied for, such as the right to make loans abroad and not pay taxes initially on any interest that they earn from those loans. That's an incentive to ship jobs overseas, and we ought not to permit that. That cost us, I think, around $3-4 billion every year. As we look at this budget, we ought to decide whether we would rather pay for that or use that money for law enforcement, education, other vital needs. I think that's the choice we need to be making in the budget process.
Isn't it very unrealistic, though, to imagine we can close those loopholes for these companies? I mean, it seems to me that the super rich and the major corporations were always going to beat any of these rulings. It seems to me. I mean, in the same way that the same kind of people get off, on the law, and they don't have the same, justice, frankly, as people who are who don't have that kind of representation. It's all about the huge lobbying interest. It's never going to change.
Well, that is the problem. Some follow the Leona Helmsley rule that taxes are just for the little people. I think our system needs to be reformed. The problem is some of these corporations think lower the overall tax rate, but we keep all the loopholes. We need a system that applies the law more fairly so that all are contributing to our security. We can do that. I'm not sure whether this Congress has the will to do it.
That's right.
Thank you for being with us this morning, Congressman. What I've been noticing, though, is that Congress is moving in the opposite direction you're talking about. Majority Leader Cantor has brought up bringing in a corporate repatriation tax break. So if you earn money overseas and have been stocking it overseas to take advantage of lower tax rates, you can bring it home for a very, very low tax rate, like a 5%, a 10%. Do you think that has any life in Congress if it actually gets brought up in legislation?
There's a major movement for it, and yes, Congressman Cantor, the congressman from Altria, and Philip Morris, which benefited so much the last time we did this, wants to let these corporations now that have hidden their money offshore to pay a 5% tax on it. Boy, that's a deal that I think most any American would like to have, only 5% taxes. That is an idea we tried before. We put a fancy title on it. I didn't vote for it, but called the American Job Creation Act, and it did not work.
Congressman, let's just respond to that, though, about the companies hiding their money offshore. People characterize it differently. There is a response from our
I think, in fairness to GE, I mean, the losses at GE Capital, first of all, Congressman Duggan, good to see you. Harold Ford.
Good to see you, Harold.
The losses at GE, the big losses at GE Capital, can't be characterized as a tax avoidance strategy. Any company would have that right under the tax code to do that. And in fairness to GE, in 2010, almost $3 billion in cash taxes were paid by the company. Now, we can quarrel over whether or not the rate should be higher.
Actually, we do quarrel about it, Harold. I think they include their property taxes and their payroll taxes. They didn't pay their fair share, and they made tax avoidance a cottage industry.
Congressman, you can have. I'm not here to defend that, but I think it's fair. It's only fair to put those numbers out there. The question I would have is the question that Willie started with. I was in Congress with you. If we believe those loopholes should be closed, and Democrats believe it, why didn't you close it when you were in the majority? Number one, and number two, if the issue of these companies taking advantage of the tax code, why not lower the rate, close the loopholes, and allow for this, whatever the Cantor claimed it's $1.5 trillion, others who claim it's a little less than $1 trillion that's overseas. Why not figure out a way to get that money back here and have it invested here? Why not draw that into the code? When we were in the majority, we should have done that. And now the Republicans in the majority, we should work with them to try to get that done.
Well, Harold, the reason is because we did this once, in fact, while you were here, and it was a total failure in terms of job creation. It was a windfall for a handful of pharmaceutical companies and companies like GE. It does not work. The title said job creation. The practice did not produce jobs. I think we do need to reform our tax code. I'm willing to consider lower rates, but I don't think we should borrow from the Chinese to do it, and I think we should plug some of these loopholes that has allowed GE to avoid its fair share.
Congressman, why does the United States of America, the home of capitalism and free enterprise, have some of the highest corporate tax rates in the world?
Well, there's a difference between the statutory rate, Pat, and the effective rate. I believe you once talked about America First. That's the kind of tax code I'd like to have that incentivizes jobs here in America. If you let these corporations continue to shift their income offshore and then apply a 5% tax again and again, you will incentivize continuing to ship more jobs offshore. That's why the Republican committee, Senator Grassley in 2004 said, said, never again. This is a one-time thing. But of course, unfortunately, it just encouraged these corporations to continue to ship more offshore. It will cost billions of dollars overall to the Treasury to change and do the repatriation, the bringing back that Harold talked about.
No, I talked about lowering the rate. I didn't talk. The repatriation is a zero tax, Congressman. I'm in agreement with you. All I'm saying is you guys should get it done then.
I hope we can.